everyone. Thank you all for joining very promptly. So let's get started. First of all, welcome to our webinar. The topic today is around data swamps, and the subtitle there, as you can see, is Order from Chaos. So we're going to discuss a few different things in terms of what is a data swamp and how we can actually achieve an ordered approach to managing that or making sure it doesn't happen. Before we get into that, let's just do a couple of quick introductions. So my name is Jon Harrison. I work for Idera, and I'm actually based in the UK, as you may be able to tell from my accent. I've also got a few of my colleagues with me. So I think we've got Tim, William, and Angela actually on today. So they're all going to be sitting in the background, and if you do have questions, they'll try and answer those as we go along. So talking about questions, let's just cover a few logistics very, very quickly. First thing is, this is a live webinar, so we're doing this one live, and the big advantage with that is that you can ask questions. So please do use the GoToWebinar question box. You can type your questions in there. My colleagues will get answers back to you, or if there's some that are particularly interesting or are coming up from a few people, they'll pass on to me and we'll try and discuss and walk through those. The webinar will be recorded, so after we finish today, probably tomorrow you'll get an email follow-up from our team here at Idera, and in there will be a link to the recording. And finally, if you've got further questions that we don't answer, or you just want to talk to us about something else, or you think of something after we've all finished, I'll pop up a slide at the end just with some contact info on, and a QR code that you can scan as well, just to try and make it easy for you to get in touch with us. So the agenda, first of all, we're just going to talk a little bit about data swamps. What are they? Why might they happen? How do they happen? And also some things we can think about to try and mitigate the risks of them. And within there, we'll also talk about why potentially they're a bad thing in most cases, and how we can also look to really make sure that perhaps they don't happen to us. As part of that, we'll then move into a little bit more in terms of how we can address some of those issues. So we'll talk about a couple of strategies, and in particular with regard to EOS Studio. As this is an Idera webinar, we'll use EOS Studio to illustrate a number of these strategies and approaches, and we will actually do a live demonstration as well of some of those as we go through. And again, at the end, we'll leave a bit of time just for a quick Q&A, make sure we've covered everything, and a quick summary as well. So let's get going into this. Apologies, I'm just going to move my little GoToWebinar bar out of the way because it's blocking my view on some things. Let's just do that. Okay. So let's talk for a moment just really around what is a data swamp. What does that term mean to most people? And with most things, these terms can be a little bit subjective. The definitions can vary depending on who you ask or what you ask. But the general consensus is really that a data swamp is a repository of data, but generally it's very disorganized. It's not really managed in terms of what may be in there, and that in turn makes it very difficult to get things out from it as well in a coherent and organized fashion. So we'll drill into this in a bit more detail shortly, but this does mean it can be a little bit dangerous. Hopefully not with the radioactive signs we've got there, but it can be a little bit dangerous in that we might not be sure what we're getting back from it. Maybe there's duplication, maybe there's things that are in there that shouldn't be in there, maybe there's things that are there that maybe we shouldn't be using. So again, we'll talk about how we can address some of that and understand what that might mean. So typically when we're looking at a data swamp, some of the characteristics we might find there, the data itself, it may be incomplete because we're not perhaps sure where it came from. Likewise, it could be inaccurate or not consistent. We're not really controlling what's being ingested, and we're not really controlling how we might be using it and extracting information from it as well. And because it's not really organized, it can also mean it's difficult to find things and extract the right information from it. And this in turn might mean it's just difficult, and users might actually struggle to find information that they need. So if we look at that in a few different ways here, in essence, what we do find is that there is, more data out there, and there's lots and lots of statistics around this. But there's lots of different sources. We might have things in relational databases. We might have things that are more document management. They may be NoSQL based. We could have other things which are hierarchical, using instances like JSON or other formats. And of course, we might have things that are on-premise. They could be hosted in the cloud. They could be results being returned from AI engines if we're using those, and so on. And the thing here really as well is that it's not just a case of having this information out there. The other risk that can occur really is we have a tendency to kind of ingest it all, gather it all, and then want to keep it and also want to use it. And this is really where I think we find that data swamps tend to kind of creep in and emerge. Often, organizations might have good intentions. They may be thinking, that's really useful data. We'll ingest that in. We'll look at how we can use that for some of our analytics later. And then the temptation is always to, well, we've got it. Let's not delete it. We're not quite sure if we do need that. Let's just keep it. Now, that in itself also really opens us up to some other problems and some of the risks. The first thing, of course, is if we're keeping all this, then where are we keeping it? Things like cloud storage can be expensive, so there's costs associated with it. Also, there might be performance implications as well. If we've got lots and lots of this data, but we're not using very much of it, yet we're storing it, again, how do we find things? Are we getting good performance? How do we optimize that? And how do we understand it really to avoid things like duplication? How do we have a strategy to help us understand traceability? Where did it come from? Lineage, where did it come from? And so on. So I think what we tend to find really is that if we can, the scenario really is we want to look at ways that we can manage and organize this better, and really to avoid ending in the situation where we have a data swamp. As we go through some of the kind of strategies and some of the utilities and tools that your studio provides, some of those will be relevant in terms of how we can use them to help us address what we may have already. And also a lot of it will be focused on, well, how can we avoid this in the first place? So ideally, what we need to start thinking about is how do we manage and organize this better? And also think about questions like, what is it that we actually need to be using? We've got all this data, but what information do we need for the business to get value? How are we using it? If we're not looking at things like retention policies, so again, that previous slide, we're just keeping things. Is that compliant? Is there policies in place based on our data governance policies, or even kind of legal requirements about how we keep the data, how long we keep it for, and what we do with it? And again, it's really down to all of these factors coming together. So let's just summarize a few of those things that I've just mentioned, perhaps in more of a single slide here. So I think really when we're looking at data swamps, there's a couple of warning signs. The first one on the screen there is what we just discussed around, that temptation to ingest everything, regardless of the source. Um, I'm not going to touch on it too much, but this is becoming also something that perhaps is becoming more complicated. We're now starting to see things like databases, which we think of as being organized and managed, but supporting things like JSON format fields, supporting variants. How do we understand what's actually in those? So that's another aspect of these things that we need to look at. I mentioned the legalities, the compliance, costs, and so on. So I think it really boils down to understanding the key points of, what is it that we're using and what do we need to use, and then understand how we are using it as well. And I've got a final slide around this really, which tries to summarize some of those risks and the idea really as to why data swamps tend to be a bad thing. So quickly running through these bullet points. The first thing is really, if we have this swamp, we have all this data, but we're not really sure what it is, where it's came from. Actually using it for analysis becomes incredibly difficult and also time consuming, because we just don't know what we have. It also means we might actually have inaccurate understanding or insight coming back from that. Maybe that could actually result in things like financial losses to the business because we're not using the right information to make our decisions. Even worse, if we're involved in an industry like healthcare, is it going to have an impact on things like patient well-being, and what would the end resulting impact of that be for our organization? And then boiling down, really, it does just result in those increased costs around the resources that we're using to keep this data that we don't actually need to use, potentially duplication of that data as well. And the other thing as well really is that all these things together, if we can't extract and use what we need, are we missing out on opportunities for the business itself? If new legislation comes through, if new opportunities arise for the business, if we can't react to that quickly and effectively because we can't get the right information, we can't be confident in what we're using for our decision making, that really could mean that the business is not going to be in a position to take advantage of those new opportunities. So I'm just going to continue on. I'm going to talk a little bit now around some of the strategies and the ways in which kind of a coherent modeling approach can help us to achieve better results from this. And as I mentioned, some of this will be relevant if you've got information and data out there already that perhaps is becoming a little bit uncontrollable, or if you're just looking at the right way to maybe think about how we're going to be managing this and taking it forward. So this slide actually is something that's been around for quite a while, and I think there's a source on it there that it actually comes from Martin Fowler and some of the studies he made. And it's often used primarily to do with application or software development. And if we really summarize it, what it's basically saying is there's often a temptation just to get on and do something to solve that specific problem. This is what the problem is. Oh, that's great. I can get in there. I can solve that. But the issue then can often become that the scope evolves. So what does that mean? Well, it really means that we're now starting to look at that quick fix, that quick piece of functionality now requires additional work, now requires additional functionality to be added to it, which invariably means more complexity. And as I say, I think this applies both to kind of software development and also to the management of data. So we're getting very quickly into a stage where we're being asked to deliver more by the business, but because we don't have the right foundations in place and we haven't architected it in a way that's going to support future development, it really starts to give us problems very, very quickly. And if we relate this more directly to things like data architecture and kind of the way in which this is matured, I'm not sure if this is coming through kind of very well here, but my green arrow is supposed to be a little bit graduated to say, you know, this hopefully is the direction we're heading in. So of course we could just go in there and write SQL code. We could access the information, the data directly. Oh, I can see the data's there. It's in that SQL database. It's in that document store. I'll just pull it out. We could do that. But of course, you know, in terms of maintainability and scalability and being able to take that forward, that does give us some challenges. You know, people have to understand this. Also, how does it relate to other things? So what was a common evolution then is, well, how about we look at using something like a physical model to represent this code pretty much directly, but it's a model, so it helps us to understand how things are related and so on. That's nice. But what about how that fits in with the organization? So this then evolved into say, well, let's have, you know, this idea of a conceptual model and think about our requirements and how this fits in. But there's quite a big gap if we're just looking at a conceptual model or a conceptual requirements and then implementing it directly in a physical model. So this has really evolved more and more until now. I think what's generally accepted is we do need to have a way that we can tie things back to the business requirements, and more you'll hear terms like data products being mentioned, and more formalized way of defining those requirements from the business, and how we tie those back with things like a standard enterprise logical model, and then eventually tying that back in turn down to the physical models. And I'll explain that a little bit more in the next couple of slides, which we'll go through fairly quickly. So the idea of an enterprise data model is certainly something that we see when we're talking to our customers and users. More and more of them are viewing this as really very important, if not critical. And you'll see on the slide there, it's basically saying, you know, this doesn't have to be a massive thing. We don't have to look at everything across the whole enterprise, across the whole organization to the nth degree. If we're looking at this, we might just be talking about a few different subject areas across the organization that are common that we want to capture at this kind of enterprise level. It maybe then goes down to more of a conceptual data model before coming down to the enterprise logical model. And you can see the types of information we might be capturing here. So we're working really from just high-level subject areas. And I actually remember a few years back now, I was talking to, I think it was the chief data officer of a very large pharmaceutical. And he was saying, oh yeah, we used to have these data models which stretched across the whole wall of the office. They had all these objects on there. They were next to impossible to follow. You know, and he then said, this is what I have on my wall now. And he had an A4 piece of paper which broke his business down into R&D to develop new products. From the R&D, we actually productize them. We look at the need. We look at how we can then manufacture them. Look at how we enter into sales cycle, supply them, and then profit, return on the investment. So literally his high-level subject area for his organization was R&D, product, manufacturing, sales and supply, and then return on investment. So these things don't have to take over the world or take over the organization, as it were. You do need to think about them as to what's important for the business and the organization and work it down from there. We'll look at this in a slightly different way in a moment. I'm actually going to go through the next slide or two fairly quickly because I think I've spoken about this already. But we do have this, you know, when we look back at that maturity model and how we work with data models, we're really looking at, are we working with the source code, the DDL directly? Are we looking at a physical model which just represents it? Are we looking at more of a logical model? But key to all this is kind of an iterative approach where we're constantly updating this. And I think perhaps more important is if we bring up the next slide here, where if we look at how an enterprise logical model can fit into this, it then starts to allow us to apply more reusable patterns into this mix. So if we have got definitions of what's a customer, what's a product, or what's an order, we can look at how we can reuse these more effectively. We might still have different projects implementing them in slightly different ways, and we need different data models for that. But that enterprise data model can really make us more productive and more effective at the way in which we're working. And then by having that brought together, this is really a big mitigation on how we can avoid what may happen if we kind of just get dragged into that data swamp where we're finding we've got everything, all our data, all our sources, and we're trying to get sense from it. And again, if we just look at the approaches we can take for this, I've picked what's generally called a medallion architecture just because it's a common approach that a lot of organizations take. There's other architectures you may use. You don't have to use all of these different layers, but with medallion, in essence, we're kind of looking at an approach where we're saying things like, well, we've got all our sources, we've got all our data out there, but as we said, we don't want all of that. We're not going to use all of that. It's not necessary. It's not effective for what we want to achieve. So what we're then looking at is having, well, let's take the parts we do need, pretty much as is, into a staging area, which is generally called a bronze layer. We might then refine or kind of take that forward into more of what we call a silver layer, where we're perhaps rationalizing and bringing together different parts of the sources into something that's more usable, and then eventually surfacing it in a controlled way using more of a star schema approach, perhaps with dimensional modeling, where we're controlling what is available for our analytics, for our business in interrogations, for our business queries, and so on. And as I say, you don't have to be fully kind of regimented about these approaches. We have some organizations we see maybe are really focused more on kind of the silver layer as the way in which they're interrogating their information, not so much the gold layer. But they can evolve. Again, it's not something you need to do all at once. And the other thing is you may need to think about, and a lot of people can get a little bit hung up on this, is where do I start? Where do I start from these different layers? And does it matter? And there's quite, what I've seen anyway, is there was quite a strong feeling that we have to drive things, perhaps if we can, from the gold layer. So the business is really maybe defining things like a data product. This is what we need. How do we implement that in terms of tables, columns that we have available? Where do they come from then in terms of the data being ingested into the staging area so that we can use them? And certainly that works very well. What we're also seeing, though, of course, is that people have these data sources already. They may not have a nice kind of gold layer with a catalog managing their data products. So they're looking at, well, I'm probably going to have to start a bit more slowly here and bring these things forward. So I'll try and talk a bit about these different ways that we can work with this kind of approach within the tool sets like ER Studio. But probably the key thing I think we're saying here, really, if we relate this back to data swamps, is this really is our kind of our layer where we have all our sources. These could be SQL databases, these could be NoSQL, they could be JSON, they could be documents, they could be pretty much anything. We don't just want to be taking this across these layers. We need to use an architecture like this to refine and bring together what it is that we're actually going to effectively use at the end of the day. Okay, so we're going to go into a bit of a demonstration now. Again, it's a live webinar, so it's a live demonstration. So we'll go through a few different things, and I'm going to look at this from a point of view, as I mentioned, from a few different ways of working. So I think to start with, what I'm going to do is work on the basis that, I do have data sources already. How can I start to build up this kind of architecture? So we'll look at how we can perhaps start to bring some things into the staging area, and then from there potentially move it into a silver layer and refine it, and perhaps then into the gold layer. And then after that, we'll maybe just quickly touch on the other way of working in terms of what if the business wants to drive this from requirements and push and then flow that down the other way around. Okay, so bear with me a second. I'm just going to drop out of here, and I'm just going to get my, there we go. Okay, so hopefully that's coming through okay. So as mentioned, for the demonstration, if we take a look at what's out in our whole arena of data sources, how can we start to ingest some of that into something like a bronze layer or a staging area? Well, a tool like EOS Studio provides a few options. We've got a whole set of different import options from external metadata, from things like SQL files or JSON files. And we can also, if we're talking around some specific platforms, bring it in from a reverse engineering process. So I'm actually going to start with that. And I'm just going to select one of my databases here. I'm just using the quick launch mechanism there to bring in the information I need. And from here, it's connected out to my list of SQL Server resources in this case. So you'll see, aha, wow, look at all these data sources. Even in my demo environment, I've got lots and lots of different databases, lots of information. What am I looking to achieve? Well, I'm going to select specifically this one here. That's called GIM. I know this has got some information in related to investments and also into things like client definitions, which is quite useful, quite interesting. We might want to look at how we can maybe take that and perform some analytics on what types of investments people are using. Again, I could bring in all sorts of other information. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep this nice and clear, just the tables from this one particular source. I could be even more kind of picky and choosy here and say, we're not interested in that, or we're not interested in that. But yeah, we'll take those. There's only 5 or 6 of them, so let's go ahead. I'm going to take the defaults, so we're just going to reverse engineer. At this point, on one of the slides, I probably glossed over it a little bit, but I talked about things like naming standards. I could actually do that as part of reverse engineering, but in this example, I'm going to leave that off for now. We're just going to say, let's go ahead. So we've connected to a data source, and we've now brought in the first pass of information that we have in there. So we've got a number of objects representing tables with columns in there. I'm just going to kind of hide away a few of these things because it's a bit cluttered on the left there. And what I might do is, because I'm going to use this to kind of represent my bronze layer. So again, don't get too hung up on these conventions around things, but I'm going to call this my kind of bronze layer. And I've now got that added in there. I'm actually going to save that because it looks like it's going to be really useful for me. and we'll maybe call this, I'm just going to call it 0828 so you can see it's today, and I'm just going to call this my GIM, which is the data source that I was working with. We'll save that away. Now, one of the things I said is really important is we want to actually start managing these things, and a really key way of doing that is by utilizing a centralized repository for our data models. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually add this in and save it into my data modeling repository. So again, don't worry about all the options here. I'm just going to add this into my demo project in my folder. What I am going to do though is I'm going to reuse something that I already have called an enterprise data dictionary. And I could fill in the other information there. I'll tell you what this is in just a moment, but it's really quite a nice capability. So it's just going to work through these little kind of progress bars. You can turn them all off. I just happen to like leaving them on when I'm doing demos, so I can see that something's actually happening. And we'll just wait for that to finish. Shouldn't take it too long to add that in. So that's me being really impatient as usual. There we go. It's just about done now. So yeah, that's all great. So that's now been added into my repository. I'll explain what this does in a moment, but over on this tab now, again, I'm just going to tidy some of these things up a little bit. Get rid of some of those. It's brought in the contents of this thing called an enterprise data dictionary, which has got a whole set of different bits of information defined already for us. So that's all good. Now, because I want to start working with this, my repository actually enforces version control. So I'm actually going to check out my diagram. And again, just so it goes smoothly in the demo, I'm going to check out everything. I don't need to. I could check out just parts of the model that I'm working with. But we'll do that. Yeah, that's nice and quick. And I'm also going to check out this data dictionary that we're using. The reason I'm doing that is if I don't, it will just keep prompting me to say that it's opening it in view only mode. Is that okay? Again, just for the demonstration, we'll do this step once, and we then have it done. Now, one of the things that's been added into this data dictionary is something called a naming standard template. And this was something that appeared on one of those slides at the start. And this can help us work with better understanding from a business perspective of our data models really easily. And especially if we start then looking to generate some of these objects into an enterprise logical model. If I just bring this up, you'll see here I've got some things defined where I'm saying from a logical model, I'd like things to be a bit more business friendly. So I'm going to use mixed case for the naming. Physical, they're going to represent things like tables directly, so they're all uppercase. And I can define some mappings in there as well, but again, don't worry too much about that. So I'm going to say let's apply this. So if we go to my model tab and say naming standards, and I'm just going to select the one that we have there. And again, I'm just going to click through a few little options here. Excuse me. And if we just do all of those things there, which I don't know why we don't appear to have a select all option here, which is a little bit of a pain. I'm just going to select everything really quickly. I'm missing something I might have. Once I've done it once, I could save it as what we call a quick launch setting, so we'd remember it next time. Yeah, we may as well do those as well. Okay. So if I click that now, all this is going to do is basically say, okay, we've reverse engineered our tables. They're all uppercase, not really very nice and friendly. For my logical model, let's just rename those also. They're more mixed case. So that's a bit more friendly. And if we look at that, can we do that there? This has been going really quickly, isn't it? We'll do all that there and put options. Logical to logical. Let's do that one more time. Or maybe just do the tables and a few of these this time. I'm just going to do that. Actually, it does say it's done that, doesn't it? Okay, let's not worry too much about that. But we can apply things like the naming standard templates to make them a bit more readable from the logical model perspective. Now, the other thing I'm going to do in here as well is maybe from my logical model. So I've got my objects defined. The way in which EOS Studio allows us to work is I can actually have multiple physical models defined against a single logical model. So I'm going to say, let's have a second physical model. This time I'm going to say the platform is against a Synapse Analytics database. And I'm going to bring in everything, all my tables that we had, because they're all nice and relevant. And again, I'm just going to compact that down. So we now have a new model representing our silver layer. Now, within our silver layer, we might start to want to refine a few of these things. So maybe what I'll do here is I'll have a look at my tables and I'll say, okay, maybe if I select these two, which look quite directly related, and I'll just go do normalization, and we'll do that as a roll up. That's all right. So what I'm going to do here is basically merge my tables for this particular layer. And we could do it again. So this is kind of that harmonization, that kind of bringing together the differences to try and make it easier to work with the information that's important to me. And again, that one's fine. We'll do that to roll down. We'll finish that one. And of course, we might want to just apply a little different layout to that one. So if we look at what we brought in from our data source, we have these tables just as we brought them in. So this is our staging area. And then as we move them into our silver layer to start doing some work with them, we've actually done some merging of parts of the different tables together, done things like a roll up and a roll down for denormalization of them to make them easier to work with and better for us. Now, the other thing I might want to start doing here as well, which is really important, is within this context, this is all looking really good, but I don't really have a feeling for, is it okay for me to use these things and to expose them out to the business? Is there anything in here that's very confidential? Is there anything in here that maybe regulations say we shouldn't be allowing people to run an analysis on? So what we can do is look at my data dictionary again here. And within things like my data security information that I have defined, I got something called a compliance mapping. So maybe I'm going to add this one in, and if we just look at it, it says this is a compliance mapping property. It's sometimes called a tag. It can have these different values. Mine's currently set to GDPR. That looks all right. And what I'm going to do is add that to maybe all of my different entities, maybe not in those ones, but maybe in my silver layer. So we're going to do that there. And we could then say, okay, that's great. Now, the next question really is, how do I see that? Well, I could go into something like investment. And behind all of this kind of information around the metadata, within my security, it's saying, oh yeah, it's got a compliance mapping property. But what might be nice as well is if we just say, let's actually display this on the screen for us. So let's actually add those in. And if I just resize all of those, I'll zoom in a moment just to show you some of this stuff in a bit more detail. It's now showing me compliance mapping. That's GDPR related. What I could also do is maybe add a security classification. And again, we can do this at our silver layer. We could also do this at attribute layer as well. So if I want to add everything into my attributes, we could do that. A security property is privacy level. This is what this means, and the values could be internal use, regulated, confidential. These can all be customized, by the way. These are just examples that I'm showing. So we're going to bind that to object. So we're now starting to see, okay, there's lots of things here that are fine for internal use only. That's fine. So what I'm doing at the moment really is building this up for perhaps some internal business analysts to have a look at, because they want to understand what kind of investments people are working with, the client types that are doing those types of investments, and so on. So we should be okay with that. That's all marked as internal use only. So what I could then do is maybe go on here, and we could maybe say, let's what will we do? Actually, let's add in another data model. So I'm going to say add in another model, and this time I'm going to call this gold, dimensional. This time though, I'm just going to turn all this off for now. That's fine. We can do that information there. So if we generate the gold layer, add that in, yeah, that's fine. So now what I have is a gold layer which is using specific dimensional notation, and from here we could then again refine this further. So in fact, maybe what I wanted to do there was, when I was doing that generation, maybe I didn't want to include all of this information. Maybe I just wanted to say we're only concerned with some of these tables, or we want to simplify some information that we're seeing. So in this gold layer now, I could maybe go into my investment types, and if I look at my columns, maybe I don't want to actually, at this kind of layering, show the investment names or the units, or we'll do the investment name, we'll keep that, but we don't want to show the unit, and we don't want to show the duration. So we can remove that from the scope. Oh, I do apologize. That's why I didn't do that way. That's fine. That's okay. We'll work with it. What I was going to do here actually was utilize the silver layer, because what I could have done is actually brought across my silver layer, which in fact I should have done. This is just to show you that this is a live demonstration. I'm just going to get rid of all those, and this time, which is what I meant to do in the first place. We're going to compare and merge. Compare and merge is something that your studio uses a lot, by the way. If you haven't looked at that, it's really powerful, and again, really helps you understand different layers in the model, because we can compare logical to physical models to other physical models. And here I'm going to say, let's just bring in those particular tables. This time I want to take everything from my silver model and merge them into my target model. So now that looks a bit better. We've now got the same reflections and same roll-ups that we had in the silver layer into the gold layer. So apologies about that. And the other thing as well, of course, is I can add in my little security tags that we had in there as well, to show the way in which we can use those. And what I was going to say here is I could then go into something like investment, and we could then potentially perhaps keep the types. So we want to see the type of investment, but maybe we don't want to see who's doing it, or we don't want to see their name. So we're controlling what we're actually exposing out to the end users who are going to be using this for the analytics. And the other nice thing that we could do from here as well, I'm going to do this quite quickly because I'm just a little bit conscious of the time we have here, is we can also create things like a lineage diagram, which again can be really quite important. So you call this data lineage. I'll just call this like mappings across my layers. And I could then say, let's have a look at investment. That's one we had. And for my silver layer, let's bring out investment as well. And from my bronze layer, we've actually got two tables, if you remember, because this was just a direct source. We could then build up things like a transformation with data streams to say what we're actually doing here is feeding information to build up a documentation layer to say that when we're working with these, we're actually going here from bronze, silver. Again, my names aren't great. It's just really to try and illustrate it for the demonstration here. We could bring, say, all of these columns are our inputs, and all of those are our outputs. And maybe this is a direct mapping in there, and we could give it a little description as well. And we could do the same thing here to say silver to gold. Maybe this one is more of a calculation or a lookup. And again, we could specify our different columns. But you'll see now that we've got different lists of columns coming through because we removed some of those. And again, if I just look at my diagram, I'm going to apply a quick layout to that as well. We're now kind of starting to document that. We've got our staging tables here. They're being fed into a transformation, which is taking them into our investment table. So that's those tables are being combined into that single one. And then from there, it's exposing just those particular fields that we selected out to our reporting, analytics, business analysts who are looking to work with that. So as I say, this is really a bit of a quick demo in terms of how we can kind of build up these layers. There's lots and lots of other things that we can do to make it a bit more structured. The one thing I do want to really quickly show you as well is how does this work the other way around? Well, maybe if I'm a business analyst, I'm looking at my business terms and my business glossaries. So a business glossary contains terms which are really all nicely documented in terms of high-level descriptions. So I'm just going to navigate through this really quickly. And in here, I'm hoping what we've got is we've got a business term called party. That's quite nice. So party, yeah. Oh, well, this sounds quite interesting because when I'm doing my analysis, what I'd like to maybe understand is, are those brokers who are doing the deals, are those employees working for my company, or are those other organizations that are maybe contracting to us? Let's have a little look at the ontology of party. Is this going to give us what we need? Okay, yeah, so party is actually showing us that it could be another organization, it could be external or internal, it could be a person who's an employee or a contractor. So this looks really interesting actually. So if I go down to my employee, how does this relate to my models? Is this maybe already defined in my corporate logical model? Okay, so there's my employee business term. There's my corporate logical data model that I have. Sorry, I've got a few other things connected to it. Oh, okay, there's an employee entity defined already. That sounds really interesting. Let's have a look at that. And I can see from here, there's the details of my corporate entity. I should just take a second to bring that up. So I could then start thinking, well, actually, I can reuse this because it's defined in my corporate logical model. Maybe let's have a real quick look at how it relates to some other things as well. We'll let that render. It's just going to bring up a HTML representation of my corporate data model here. And from there, we'll see that it includes objects like employee, but also includes, are they full-time employees? Who are they related to? I apologize, I tried this all earlier and it was flying along nicely, but I'm running everything on my laptop for the demo. So it's got a virtual machine with SQL Server repository, as well as our back-end repository services, the client stuff as well. So it's having a good long think about that. I'm going to leave that running. All it would show us there is the famous words you see as soon as I say I'll leave it running, it comes up. Okay, so there's employee. I can see they could be full-time or they could be a contractor. That sounds pretty much what we're looking for, actually. So what I could now start to do is maybe go back to my data model. And this is our gold layer. So now we're going the other way. What if I say, well, let's have a look at that logical corporate model that we just were having a quick dive into. And we'll browse that through here. So that's my corporate logical model. That's what we're looking at. I've already opened this once, that's fine. That's all okay. I'm just going to select that part of the model so we're not getting hundreds of tables back. I'm not interested in those. Those already exist in my model. All I want to know about is, are they a contractor, are they an employee, are they full-time, do they work in a department, or are they an agency? That all looks great to me. So they don't exist yet. Let's actually merge those into my current model from my corporate model. And the bit I always forget to do here, let's also create something called a universal mapping. So if I say OK to that and finish, yeah, that's all great. And again, it will just go away and bring that information in. And again, we'll close all that. And if I just apply my layout again, so what we've now got is my original tables that we brought in from the source into staging, into bronze, into silver, and then exposed up into the gold layer. What I've also done now is brought into this gold layer for this purposes of perhaps this particular report, the fact that I now want to start building this up a bit further to identify as a broker, an employee, or they working as part of an agency or a contractor. Can I get useful information from these tables and work with it that way? And the other thing you'll see here as well, I hope, is if I go where used, and I click that on that, we're looking here at that EMP table that I brought in, you'll see it's automatically created what we call a universal mapping back into the corporate logical model. So again, I'm building up that lineage. So if I'm now looking at this thinking, where did that come from? Oh, that's okay. It came from my corporate logical data model. I can see that straight away. So I'm now confident that this is a good definition. This is something that we should be using, and we can take it forward from there. Now we could then start working that back into the silver model, silver layer. Okay, I showed loads of stuff there. Actually, I didn't. I thought we'd get through that a bit more quickly. So I hope you followed what was going on there. But what I'm going to do just in the last minute is we'll jump back the quick summary, and then if there's a couple of questions that haven't been answered, we can look at doing those as well. So let's just bring that up. Okay, so in terms of what we've seen in the session, the demonstration, but also in terms of how this relates back to the start, I think really the important thing is that what we've got to really try and achieve is a strong understanding of the data we have and how that's going to translate into useful information. And some of the things that are really critical to that, or having a strong governance policy along with a good, clear, managed modelling policy and collaboration and communication. And we saw some of that in the demonstration, I hope. So we saw that we had a centralized model with all our data models in there. We had that enterprise logical model up at the top layer driving all that. We were able to easily promote things through from things like a data source to a bronze to a silver to gold, and also the other way back down. So if we're working from a data product definition with our glossaries, our terms, pushing that back down again. And then, that whole collaboration bit as well worked with that linkages from the business terms, business glossary definitions, back down into the data models. So I'll just leave that on the screen for a second. Lots and lots of good information as well, and we obviously do host these kinds of webinars pretty much monthly, with one or two things going on each month for EOS Studio, so do have a look at the events page. Full online documentation is available up there as well. But I'm going to pause just for the last minute or two I think we've got, and I'm guessing my colleagues in the background have done a great job of answering lots and lots of questions as they came in. Tim, is there anything else that we need to quickly cover?
Tim had to jump for a demo. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat or in the question section. So there weren't any questions that maybe need to be readdressed. It looks like maybe you've hit all the key points from a data swamp perspective, John.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Angela. So yeah, I was just bringing up the pane there, and I see that Tim's answered a few, so he's been doing a good job of answering those in the background as he's gone through. So again, this has been recorded. The link will be sent out to you. If you do want to kind of get in touch with us, maybe schedule a more one-to-one chat or a one-to-one demo, there's a QR code there that will just capture you've been on this event and want to follow up from it. So feel free to scan that. Otherwise, thank you for attending the session today, and thank you for staying online and watching through. I hope it was useful. And as I said, I would encourage you to keep an eye out on the events page for other things that are coming through.